Imagine that the father of modern physics, the man who discovered gravity and revolutionized mathematics, spent more time trying to decode biblical prophecies than developing his equations. Now imagine he mathematically calculated the end of the world for the year 2060 and that his heirs, upon finding piles of secret manuscripts after his death, marked them as unfit for publication. Isaac Newton was not just a scientist. He was a dangerous heretic. When Newton died in 1727, he was given a state funeral and buried in Westminster Abbey with full honors. But there was a secret. In locked rooms of his estate, thousands of handwritten pages revealed another life. A life devoted to alchemy, decoding apocalyptic prophecies, and an obsessive search for forbidden knowledge. Writings that, if made public during his lifetime, would have destroyed his reputation and possibly led to prison or worse. By the end of the 17th century, alchemy had become a forbidden practice in England as the Crown and Parliament tried to prevent alchemists from creating counterfeit gold. Denying the Trinity was considered heresy punishable by law. In 1697, a Scottish student named Thomas Aikenhead was executed for openly expressing anti-Trinitarian ideas. Newton knew the risks, so he built a double life that would only be revealed centuries later. In 1936, something extraordinary happened. Isaac Newton's unpublished manuscripts were auctioned by Suze on behalf of Gerard Wallop, the 9th Earl of Portsmouth, consisting of 329 lots of Newton's papers, more than a third of which appeared to have an alchemical nature. The economist John Maynard Keynes bought many of these documents and upon studying them was shocked. In his famous posthumous essay Newton the Man 1947, Keynes wrote that Newton was not the first of the age of reason but the last of the magicians, the last of the Babylonians and Sumerians, the last great mind of an ancient occult tradition. The manuscripts revealed an unknown Newton, a man who had written perhaps 1 million words on alchemy and even more on religious subjects. From biblical prophecies and the dimensions of Solomon's temple to the parrot of the orthodox doctrine of the Holy Trinity. This is the story of the other Isaac Newton, the one official history tried to hide. The man who believed the laws of physics were only the surface of a much deeper reality encoded in ancient texts and sacred structures. The scientist who spent 50 years studying Solomon's temple because he believed its proportions contained the secrets of the universe. The heretic who mathematically calculated when Christ would return to earth. Newton's double life began in 1672. For more than 50 years, from the late 1670s until his death in 1727, Newton devoted himself obsessively to studying the Temple of Solomon. While he was working on the Principia, he was also reconstructing the temple and commenting on the reconstructions of others. Why would a physicist spend decades studying an ancient building destroyed nearly 2,000 years earlier? Because Newton believed the temple was not merely a religious structure. It was a three-dimensional diagram of the cosmos, a coded model of natural law built according to proportions that revealed profound secrets. Newton studied and wrote extensively about the Temple of Solomon, dedicating an entire chapter of the chronology of ancient kingdoms amended to his observations. His primary source of information was the description of the temple given in 1 Kings of the Hebrew Bible, which he translated himself from the original Hebrew. But the real work was in his unpublished manuscripts. Newton produced detailed floor plans, proportional calculations, and studies of every measurement. A major part of his investigation concerned the measurements of the temple, which he described as harmonic and constructed precisely according to the proportion required by architecture. Newton regarded these proportions as consistent with Books 3 and 4 of Vitruvius's Durch Architectura. The central challenge was determining the exact length of the sacred cubit, the unit of measurement used in the temple's construction. Newton used John Greaves's measurements of the Great Pyramid and systematically compared them with data from ancient sources such as Herodotus, Vitruvius, Strabo, Josephus, and others. In a meticulous and extensive study titled A Dissertation upon the Sacred Cubit of the Jews, Newton scientifically estimated that the sacred cubit measured 2.068068 English feet or 24.816 inches. Why did this matter so much? Because Newton had a bold theory. He believed that determining the true length of the cubit would allow him to calculate the exact circumference of the earth in his studies of gravity. The proportions of the temple were not arbitrary. They encoded information about the structure of the planet itself. Modern research has confirmed Newton's intuition. Saul Kullak, a scientist with many patents who uses mathematical analysis to study the Bible, discovered clues in the construction of Solomon's temple that described scientific principles with remarkable precision. Kullak believes these clues were used by Newton as the foundation of modern science. Specifically, Kullak studied the Sea of Solomon, a bronze basin located in the southeast corner of the temple's inner court. Encoded in its proportions, as described in the Bible, is the precise size of the earth. The relationship between the basin's diameter, height, and circumference expresses through sacred geometry fundamental mathematical constants. Newton was not merely interested in archaeology. He believed that the ancient priests of Israel possessed advanced scientific knowledge that had been lost. Manuscripts dating from the Principia period indicate that Newton believed the priests of the original religion were also skilled natural philosophers. The study of nature therefore was intrinsically linked to piety and could itself be a form of worship and devotion. For Newton, understanding the temple was not merely an academic pursuit. It was an apocalyptic necessity. The temple appears in the prophecies of Ezekiel and in the book of Revelation, just as biblical chronology held hidden meaning. The dimensions of the objects described in Scripture had figurative significance, and none was more important than the Temple of Solomon, described in detail by Ezekiel and serving as the setting of the apocalypse. An exact knowledge of the temple's architecture and dimensions was therefore essential for correctly interpreting the Bible's deepest and most hidden meanings. And Newton was determined to interpret those prophecies, especially those concerning the end of times. Newton spent years studying the book of Daniel and the Revelation of John. He developed a rigorous method of prophetic interpretation which he outlined in a manuscript titled Rules for Interpreting the Words and Language in Scripture. In this work, he detailed the requirements for what he considered to be proper biblical interpretation. Applying his method, Newton reached an extraordinary conclusion. In a 1704 manuscript, he described his attempts to extract scientific information from Scripture and estimated that the world would not end before the year 2060. How did he arrive at that date? Newton applied a strict analytical method using the book of Daniel. The period of 1,260 days, if dated from the complete conquest of the three kings in 800 CE, would end in 2060 CE. It could end later, but Newton saw no reason for it to end sooner. Newton was cautious about the accuracy of his prediction. When making it, he wrote, "I mention this not to assert when the time of the end shall be, but to put an end to the rash conjectures of fanciful men who are frequently predicting the time of the end, and by doing so bring the sacred prophecies into discredit as often as their predictions fail." But it is crucial to understand what Newton meant by the end of the world. He may not have referred to the post-2060 event as a destructive act resulting in the annihilation of the globe and its inhabitants, but rather as something in which the world as he knew it would be replaced by a new one based on a transition into a divinely inspired age of peace. Newton was convinced that Christ would return around that time and establish a global kingdom of peace. Babylon, the corrupt Trinitarian Church, would also fall and the true gospel would be preached openly once again. The two manuscripts detailing this prediction remained hidden until the 21st century. On February 22, 2003, the Daily Telegraph published a front-page article announcing Isaac Newton's prediction that the world would end in 60. Although the date was not new to the small community of scholars who study Newton's theology, it was the first time the general public became aware of Newton's prophetic visions. The revelation caused a global sensation. But for those who have studied Newton deeply, it came as no surprise. It was simply another piece of the puzzle of a man who saw all things physics, alchemy, prophecy, sacred architecture as parts of a single integrated system. Newton believed he was recovering a lost science, a knowledge that unified spirit and matter, revelation and reason. Like other European scholars of his time, he believed that the ancient Egyptians possessed wisdom that had since been lost through the centuries. The search for ancient hidden secrets was a central trope of alchemy, a subject Newton studied deeply. This quest led him to study the pyramids. In notes later sold by Spies, Newton was trying to find evidence to support his theory of gravitation, but beyond that, he believed the ancient Egyptians held the secrets of alchemy that had since been lost. Today, these areas of study may seem unrelated, but they did not seem so to Newton in the 17th century. The notes on the pyramids show burn marks along the edges. Newton viewed his work in mathematics and physics as secondary to alchemy and theology. This is not the Newton we learn about in school, but it is the real Newton, the man who dedicated most of his intellectual life not to equations, but to the pursuit of hidden knowledge. And when he died, his heirs were horrified. They ensured that very few would see the papers, for they were a gold mine of compromising material on the man himself. His writings were filled with evidence of just how heretical his views were. What Newton sought in his forbidden manuscripts was what he called the ancient wisdom, a knowledge that connected the workings of the cosmos to spiritual law. He believed there were fundamental principles, laws that governed both matter and consciousness. These laws had once been known by the ancients, encoded in their sacred structures and later lost when knowledge became fragmented. If you feel drawn to this quest, to understanding how reality truly works, to principles that go beyond conventional physics, there is a book that systematizes exactly what Newton sought. The Master Key reveals the 7 laws that structure reality and offers a complete map for accessing and directing the forces that shape your experience. It is the kind of integrated knowledge Newton devoted his life to uncovering, now available in a clear and practical form. The link is in the description. The final irony of Newton's story is this. The man who transformed science by discovering universal laws believed that those physical laws were only the surface. Beneath them, he sought something more fundamental, a master key to all reality. And perhaps most unsettling of all is that Newton may have been right about something modern science is only beginning to rediscover. The idea that consciousness, matter, and spirit are not separate domains, but different aspects of a unified system. Modern quantum physics has uncovered phenomena that challenge our materialist understanding. Particles that seem to know when they are being observed, entanglements that suggest instantaneous connections across space. Neuroscientists admit they cannot explain consciousness in purely material terms. Psychologists observe synchronicity phenomena that Jung called meaningful coincidences. Newton intuitively knew there was something more. That's why he devoted so much time to domains we now call occult. He saw no contradiction between discovering the laws of motion and studying apocalyptic prophecy, between calculating planetary orbits and distilling alchemical mercury. To him, it was all part of the same investigation, understanding the deep structure of reality. His forbidden manuscripts were not the ravings of a mad genius. They were the meticulous documentation of a search for integrated knowledge, the kind of understanding our civilization has since fragmented into separate mutually exclusive disciplines. When we look at the date 2016 that Newton calculated, we should not see it as a simplistic doomsday prophecy. Newton was trying to map historical cycles, patterns he saw repeating throughout time. He believed human history followed mathematical principles which could be discovered through careful study of sacred texts and historical events. And here's something unsettling. Newton wasn't entirely wrong about the patterns. Civilizations do move in cycles. Systems of knowledge are lost and rediscovered. What we call the scientific revolution was in many ways a rediscovery of principles known in different forms by ancient civilizations. Newton understood something our age has forgotten. That separating the spiritual from the material, the subjective from the objective, consciousness from matter may be a false dichotomy. His quest for the philosopher's stone was not only about transmuting metals, it was about transmuting consciousness. His study of Solomon's temple was not merely archaeology. It was an attempt to understand how physical structures could embody cosmological principles. Newton's forbidden manuscripts show us that the father of modern science was not the cold rationalist we imagine. He was a rational mystic, a meticulous heretic, a mathematical alchemist. He was someone who believed that all forms of knowledge, scientific, spiritual, prophetic, were aspects of a greater truth. And perhaps the most important lesson is this. The most powerful knowledge often must remain hidden. Not because it is false, but because it threatens established structures of power. Newton kept his manuscript secret, not out of shame, but for survival. He knew that certain truths could only be spoken when the world was ready to hear them. His predictions about 2060, his alchemical studies, his rejection of the Trinity, all of it was deemed too dangerous to publish, and so it remained hidden for more than 2 centuries. When it finally emerged, it completely transformed our understanding of who Newton really was. The question that remains is this: what other knowledge has been deliberately erased from official history? What other brilliant minds conducted secret investigations into domains that orthodoxy rejected? And most importantly, what did Newton truly discover that we still do not fully understand? His manuscripts suggest he was close to something. A synthesis between science and spirituality, between reason and revelation, a master key that would open all doors of knowledge. He did not live long enough to complete the work. Or perhaps he did and hid it in manuscripts yet to be found. What we know for certain is that Isaac Newton, the greatest scientist in history, devoted most of his intellectual energy not to science as we know it, but the pursuit of a deeper science, one that would integrate all levels of reality into a single coherent system. And when we look at the state of the world today, fragmented, polarized, lost between excessive materialism and baseless spirituality, perhaps what we most need is precisely the kind of synthesis Newton sought. A vision that does not force false choices between reason and intuition, between science and wisdom, between the measurable and the meaningful. Newton's forbidden manuscripts are not curious relics of a pre-scientific age. They are reminders that the pursuit of true knowledge has always been broader, deeper, and more dangerous than official history admits. They are evidence that the greatest minds of humanity have always known. Reality is far stranger and more wondrous than any single system can contain. Newton left us 2 legacies. The public one, the laws of motion, universal gravitation, calculus, transformed the world. The secret one, the manuscripts on alchemy, prophecy, and hidden knowledge is still transforming our understanding of what it means to know. Perhaps it is fitting that the man who illuminated so much of physical reality kept his deepest explorations in the shadows. For some truths can only be grasped by those willing to look beyond the boundaries of accepted knowledge. By those who, like Newton, are willing to be called heretics in pursuit of something truer. Thank you for watching.